Hi everyone, I am Awni Etaywe from the University of New South Wales. I'm glad to be with you today. Today I'll be presenting part of my PhD project where I'll be focusing on the role of bonds in the legitimation of violence in extremist public threatening communication. To give a little bit of introduction to my presentation, this presentation falls within my PhD project where I investigate affiliation strategies as incitement tactics in terrorism cases, where I take incitement as one aspect of a threat of terrorist public communication. To achieve their agendas via violence, terrorists require a degree of ideological justification and exploitation of social bonds to legitimate their violence and to mobilize support. This paper contributes to the discourse analytic approach to incitement texts by examining how bonds tabled in discourse are exploited to legitimize our actions and to delegitimize outgroups. The aim is to shed light on the rhetorical patterns of bonds that terrorists use to lend legitimacy to the incited violence by zooming out from the bag of bonds in discourse and instead focusing on the rhetorical function of legitimation behind the use of these bonds in discourse. So the deployment of these bonds is considered as a function of the discursive purpose to which these bonds are strategically put in the inciting text. The terrorist incitement text drive the use of our centered bonds versus their centered bonds to achieve a primary function, and that is legitimizing violence based on the positive presentation of self, i.e. the in-group of the terrorist or the extremist, and the negative presentation of outgroups. So by legitimation, we refer here to a primary function of discourse, where the main function of discourse is to answer questions such as why should we do something, or why did we do something violently? Why should we do it in X way? And why is an action allegedly reasonable or socially acceptable? Legitimation in this paper is considered a social discursive act of constructing the why for the incited violence. As Van Dyck proposes, within a conflictive context of opposing social groups, to describe who we are and who they are becomes a key criterion of membership and a tool of legitimation and delegitimation. And within this polarized context, legitimating us implies delegitimating others. And by this, the discursive acts follow the categories of ideological schema of the in-group and challenge the identity of the out-groups by delegitimating their membership, actions, goals, norms and values, social position, and their access to our social resources. I draw on these categories to describe what is being legitimated or delegitimated in my data set. To explore how these categories are being legitimated or delegitimated, I draw on the concept of evaluative coupling. And I look at the evaluative text bytes in texts, i.e. the textual segments that serve to unveil a terrorist bond-based reasoning for legitimation and delegitimation. So I adopt the evaluative coupling concept proposed by Knight to look at how the evaluative language is used to legitimize our violence and delegitimize others. In this example, but what few know is that Rotherham is just one of an ongoing trend of rape and molestation perpetrated by these immigrants. So this utterance construes immigrants are bad, rapists and molesters bond, and this bond is realized by coupling these immigrants with perpetration of an ongoing trend of rape and molestation. Van Dyck suggests or adds that a successful investigation into legitimation and delegitimation includes exploring the references to these reasons and to courses of action that had to be taken because of certain contextual constraints, causes, or opinions. And that's why we need to map the strategies or the dynamics used in legitimation onto these references. Van Leeuwen's strategy of how discourse constructs a critique and legitimation gives a framework for examining these references. The first is moralization, that is by reference to specific value systems. The second is rationalization. The third is authorization. And the fourth is metapoiesis. Additionally, literature suggests another way of mapping these grounds or modes of argumentation, and these are the classic persuasive modes: pathos, logos, and ethos, which help explore the style associated with appraisal used in the acts of legitimation and delegitimation. However, literature doesn't show how bonds might be used in the act of legitimation, and here is where I'm coming to add to literature. So the paper concerns itself with bonds realized by evaluative couplings, and I look at two types of strategies here of bonding. Communing, where positive shared bonds are positioned as shareable, and negative bonds are positioned as unshareable. And here I refer to communing bonds and condemning bonds. Okay. So using this approach, style of legitimation can be thought of as a form of bond disposition. The method I'm drawing on as such, first of all, the data set I'm using is a set of 6 texts by Osama bin Laden after the 9/11 attacks, and the Christchurch Manifesto, that is the great replacement communicated by Tarrant after or just before he perpetrated the attacks on 2 mosques in New Zealand in 2019. And why these two in particular? Because they represent the 2 most lethal ideologies in the world according to the Global Terrorism Index. Okay, these are the texts. So the discourse analysis procedure undertaken for the qualitative examination of these texts follow these steps here. First, I focus on the utterances and text segments where evaluative couplings were used. For example, back to the same example, but what few know is that Rotherham is just one of an ongoing trend of rape and molestation perpetrated by these immigrants. Here we have immigrants are bad, rapists and molesters bond, and the bond is realized lexicogrammatically by a hyperbolic negative reference to immigrants' act of rape and molestation as an ongoing trend. And this is the precise dynamic employed for delegitimation, exactly delegitimating the action of the immigrants, okay? And then the bonds are categorized into communing bonds or condemning bonds. Communing bonds which legitimate us, and condemning bonds which serve to delegitimize out groups. Following Van Dijk's themes of delegitimation, I identify then what is being delegitimated. So in this example, what is being delegitimated is the immigrant's action. Then to explore the patterns of how legitimation is enacted, the precise dynamics were tabulated under Van Leeuwen's 4 strategies of a critique. And here in this example, we have an example of moral evaluation, okay? Finally, to explore the theorist style at the rhetorical structure level, the bonds were mapped onto the modes of argumentation: logos, ethos, and pathos. And in this example, we have an instance of use of ethos, where Tarrant constructs himself as a credible person who knows that what few know, and an ethical character who is against rape and molestation. The key findings. The key findings related to communing and condemning bonds as basis for legitimation and delegitimation. This shows a visual representation of the 2 opposing networks of values or bonds used or tabled in bin Laden's text. We have communing bonds cluster and we have condemning bonds cluster. On the communing bonds cluster, we have Muslims constructed as victim, monotheist, good monotheist or muwahideen, that is the good tawheed, monotheism, and the good jihad. Okay. On opposition to that, we have the condemning bond cluster, where we have the victimizer US front, the bad non-believers, the pre-Islamic democratic approach, and the non-believer, who are the US front here. Okay, here in this in Osama bin Laden text, we have the outer groups constructed as impeding the formation and maintenance of our identity and power. And Osama bin Laden's text tended to presuppose victimization and implying religious superiority. In contrast, Tarrant's text present our groups as impeding the formation and maintenance of our identity and power, but the bonds tabled by Tarrant tended to presuppose superiority in race, okay, and the need to restore power over other social groups. Here in Tarrant, we have again two opposing social groups, our group against others, okay, presented as social values, two networks of social values. So we have communing bonds cluster that reflect us. We are the good white or West. We have the necessary radical acts bond, the necessary white fertility rates, and the good popularism, the good Europeanness, and the necessary hierarchy. In contrast, we have the condemning bond cluster, where we have the immoral nihilism, urging for the religious identity to be maintained, and the anti-white immigrants, the unwanted becoming minority status, the weak diversity, the disaster of the individualism. We have urbanization as contra nationalism. We have the pro-immigrants as being anti-white, and we have the bond of democracy as incompetent, and Europeanization as destructive. That is the citizenship grant for non-European, non-white, and non-Christian as destructive. So to give some examples from Osama bin Laden's key bonds, Bush and his supporters came out to fight Islam. So here, others, the outgroups who are incited against in Iraq and Afghanistan, are coupled with negative values. They are here to fight Islam. And again, in inciting against democratic options and to go for jihad, he couples these democratic options with serious misguided and misguiding approach in the second example. In the third example, we have jihad is a needed duty, where jihad is presented as a good bond and a duty. In Tarrant's key bonds, we have, for example, nationalism and the white race, racial nationalism is what provides strength. So it is constructed as a positive bond here to commune with and to incite against others who are supporting other approaches. And the second example of Tarrant, we have, therefore, we must destabilize and discomfort this society, where he positively positions radical actions. Okay. Looking at the rhetorical patterns as to what is legitimated and how, Osama bin Laden as well as Tarrant both tended to choose simultaneously three options at a time when they legitimize us or delegitimize others. And these are the choice from the modes of legitimation, which I call the modes of legitimation or delegitimation, the themes of legitimation, and the critique dynamic. Okay. To legitimate self, Osama bin Laden tended to focus on legitimating our actions by primarily relying on two persuasive modes, ethos and logos. To enhance the value coefficient of our actions, he challenged the identity of the outgroups chiefly by ethos and logos-based delegitimation of their actions, values, goals, membership, and social action, social positions, as seen in this example, in this summary. Okay. All right. To demonstrate how legitimation of our action is established in Osama bin Laden text, look at this example. To my brothers, the Mujahideen in Iraq, to the heroes in Baghdad, to the descendants of Salahuddin, to the free people, to the soldiers of Allah, the arrows of Islam, and the first line of defense of this ummah. Here we have an example of appealing to the emotions of the incitees, their pathos, and we have an instance of legitimation of action, jihad, by moral evaluation, specifically by glorifying jihad and mujahideen and their role. To exemplify the ethos-based acts of delegitimation, which operates by appeal to the inciter's values and character, look at this example. We are following up with great care and concern the Crusaders' preparation for war to occupy the formal capital of Islam, to loot Muslims' wealth, and appoint a puppet government. Here we have an example of ethos-based legitimation, active delegitimation, delegitimation of the goals of others, okay, the Crusaders, as realized by to occupy, to loot, and to appoint a puppet government, okay, rationalization. In his logos-based acts of delegitimation, Osama bin Laden deployed couplings that operate by persuading through logical argumentation, as in this example. It is no secret that any government formed by the US is a traitor and collaborator created to annihilate jihad. Again, we have an example of logos, the legitimation of goals by rationalization. I mean, the governments are aimed at and created to annihilate jihad and support the USA. Okay. An example on mythopoesis was found, a few examples on this critique dynamic was found in Osama bin Laden's text as in follows. Tora Bora, which is a battle between Al-Qaeda and the Americans in Afghanistan. Tora Bora was a great battle where faith triumphed over all the material forces of the people of evil. Here we have mythopoesis critique dynamic, and we have ethos-based delegitimation of membership of others by demonizing them. That is by reference to religious adversary as evil forces in opposition to Al-Qaeda believer members. Looking at the rhetorical patterns as to what is delegitimated and legitimated and how in Tarrant's manifesto, again, we have focus on our actions by focusing and relying on ethos and logos-based arguments. And we have more focus on their actions, values, and membership by using ethos and logos-based arguments primarily. To demonstrate how our actions are legitimated in Tarrant's text, look at this. When you discover a nest of vipers in your yard, do you spare the adolescents? Do you allow them to grow freely, openly, to one day bite your child as they play in your own yard? No, you burn the nest and kill the vipers. Here, we have an instance where the immigrants are compared with the nest of vipers, and the incitees are encouraged to kill them, to burn them. Okay, we have a logos-based argument, especially realized in the rhetorical question, and we have an instance of legitimation of action, that is immigration, and by rationalization, okay, through making that comparison here. And to enhance the incitee's belief in the legitimacy of the incited actions, Tarrant tended to most frequently delegitimate outgroups' actions, values, and membership, as in this example. Mass immigration will destroy our communities, destroy our ethnic bind, destroy our cultures, and destroy our peoples. We have here an example of anaphora, where where Tarrant emphasizes the moral or the moral evaluation of immigrants as being destructive force of the white. Okay, here he delegitimizes the action of immigration and the actions of the immigrants by pathos based argument, by appealing to the feelings of insecurity and concerns about the future, as well as the white people, their culture, their ethnic binds, and their communities, turning the violence into an emotional goal. Here we have the same when he criticizes diversity as being not strength. He compares China, considered as non-diverse, yet powerful country, with more diverse countries who are weakening, okay, just to delegitimize the value of diversity and multiculturalism. Again, we have an example of logos-based argument, delegitimating the values here, the value of diversity, and we have an example of moral evaluation. To conclude, this paper contributes to research into the role of evaluative language in articulating a terrorist ideological schema and legitimating harmful social actions. The similarities between the two terrorists in drawing on similar strategies could be ascribed to the terrorist like-mindedness and the norms of the inciting genre. The three simultaneous choices in the act of legitimation evidence that while intergroup conflicts take the form of struggle over categories such as activities, resources, values, and so forth, conflicts are inherently over a group legitimacy. This research contributes to our understanding of how terrorists tend to gear bonds to legitimize violence, and this deployment of bonds was demonstrated as being achieved by three simultaneous choices. The first is related to what is legitimated or delegitimated, and the second is related to the reasons, the grounds of critique, and the third is drawing on any mode of legitimation to strengthen the incitee's believability of the link between violence and the incitee's various goals, such as defending some ideological or physical values. The paper finally recommends that this multi-level analysis be extended to examining legitimation in other discourses. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. These are the key references. Thank you for listening, and I would be happy to receive your questions and comments. Thank you.